Welcome to ADHYYAN Defense Academy. So in today's session, I'm going to talk about comprehension. So as I told you in our last class also, last lecture, last session, that in SPI GAT paper 2022, and if you actually look at the previous year papers also, कॉम्प्रिहेंशन से हमेशा 10 मार्क्स के क्वेश्चन आते हैं जहाँ पे एक एंटोनिम एक सिनोनिम्स आते हैं और बाकी जो 8 क्वेश्चंस है वो एक्सक्लूसिवली कॉम्प्रिहेंशन से ही आते हैं और हमें उनके साथ एमसीक्यू ऑप्शंस दिए जाते हैं. So the questions are mostly MCQ. We have options in there and we have to choose the right option, right? So standing there and knowing that, we'll have to understand first what exactly comprehension is. So comprehension comes from the word comprehend. So what does comprehend means? Comprehend means to grasp something mentally. दिमाग से एक चीज को समझना. So many a times it happens with us that we are presented with a set of information, but we are supposed to summarize it all and understand what's the main concept of it. So in comprehension also, exactly this is what that we do, that we are given a whole passage, we have to read the passage, and once we are done reading it, we basically have to understand and comprehend the main informations which have been passed in the paragraph, through the paragraph to us, right? So without any further delay, let's go to our comprehension that we have for today. So I'll read out the comprehension to you. Modern economic theory does not differentiate between renewable and non-renewable materials, as its approach is to measure everything by the means of money price. Thus, taking various alternative fuels like coal, oil, wood and water power, the only difference between them recognized by modern economics is relative cost per equivalent unit. तो हमें ये बताया जा रहा है इस पैराग्राफ में कि अभी जो मॉडर्न इकोनॉमिक थ्योरी है इसका ये डिफरेंशिएट, मतलब ये जो मॉडर्न इकोनॉमिक्स है ये रिन्यूएबल या नॉन रिन्यूएबल सोर्सेज ऑफ एनर्जी क्या होता है. I'll get back to it. I'll circle back to it. But before that, we need to understand कि ये जो हमें ये बताया जा रहा है इस पैराग्राफ में कि मॉडर्न इकोनॉमिक्स के अनुसार अभी नॉन रिन्यूएबल और रिन्यूएबल सोर्सेज ऑफ जो मटेरियल्स है, जो रिसोर्सेज हमें मिलता है अवेलेबल, उनमें डिफरेंशिएशन उनके रिन्यूएबल या नॉन रिन्यूएबल होने के आधार पर नहीं किया जाता, right? So right now the modern economics is all about cost efficiency and cost management. So they look at using, or they basically decide on using a source of non-renewable or renewable source of energy based on their cost efficiency. So the cheaper actually gets the game. Speaking about renewable and non-renewable sources of energy, as the name itself also implies, so renewable is the energy sources in our society which we can actually remake. They can be produced again. But non-renewable sources of energy are basically the energy sources that once we run out of, that once we exhaust totally, cannot be renewed or cannot be accessed back again. Right? So as do we know, coal is a fuel, a fossil fuel that is basically used for like thousands and thousands of years now. But as do we also know that coal is basically extracted from underground, where from mines, and once we are exhausted with the resources, the underground resources of coal that we have, we cannot make coal again. Same goes with petroleum as well. So in this paragraph we are being told that modern economics are not differentiating among resources based on if they're renewable or non-renewable. They are basically going for a cost efficient perception of it, where only the usage of the resources which will actually help the industries to curtail their cost a bit is the one given priority to. So going to the next paragraph, the cheapest is automatically the one to be preferred, exactly what I said, as to do otherwise would be irrational and uneconomic. Okay, so irrational is something which is not well thought. So they're saying that it is their responsibility, it is their decision to actually prioritize the resources which usage of which will actually help them to curtail the cost a bit. So standing there, they're basically prioritizing on the resources which they think can help them curtail down the price or can be availed cheaper in comparison or relative to other resources available. From a Buddhist point of view, of course, this will not do sense. The essential difference between non-renewable fuels like coal and oil on one hand and renewable sources like wind power and water power on the other cannot be simply overlooked. So here we get to have a new angle to our paragraph where we are having a Buddhist view where they're saying that the kind of difference that renewable and non-renewable sources of energy hold is not something that has to be overlooked, exactly what modern economics is suggesting, right? Lastly, non-renewable goods must be used only if their use is indispensable, and then only with the greatest care and highest concern of conservation. To use them carelessly or extravagantly in an act of violence, and while complete non-violence may not be possible on this earth, it is nonetheless a duty of man to aim at the ideal of non-violence in all he does. So, if we understand, अगर हम बुद्धिस्ट व्यू पॉइंट को समझते हैं, वो लोग ये नहीं बता रहे कि आप नॉन रिन्यूएबल सोर्सेज यूज ही मत करो, पर वो लोग ये बता रहे कि अगर आप नॉन रिन्यूएबल सोर्सेज यूज कर रहे हैं तो हमें वो ऐसे उनका यूज जो है हमें ऐसे करना है ताकि हम उनका जो क्वांटिटी है वो एग्जॉस्ट ना कर दे, and we'll have to keep a check. We'll have to keep a check on the amount of non-renewable energy that we are using, right? क्योंकि अगर non-renewable energy खत्म हो जाता है या indiscriminately use करते हैं हम without keeping a check on it, without having a restraint on the same, then बहुत जल्दी we will run out of some of our non-renewable sources of energy, and that might just bring in like detrimental consequences to us on the society, right? So Buddhist ये कह रहे कि आप पहले तो समझो कि renewable और non-renewable sources जो है उनका जो difference है वो हम overlook नहीं कर सकते, because the difference is actually very significant for all of us to understand and acknowledge. और उसके बाद वो ये बता रहे कि use अगर एकदम मतलब there was the word also indispensable. So indispensable मतलब something which cannot be avoided, something which cannot be escaped, right? तो indispensable का मतलब होता है जो करना ही है, ठीक है, मतलब जो हम बिना किए नहीं कर रह सकते, जो बिना किए नहीं हो सकता, that is what indispensable mean. So they are saying that if at all if it's indispensable and the usage is actually made inescapable, then only we must be using non-renewable resources, but at the same time we'll have to keep a check on the amount of non-renewable energies that we are using for a given period of time, right? So this was basically the whole paragraph, and this is how we comprehend a comprehension paragraph. Going forward to the questions, so if you might just look at the first question that we have on board and on the screen. So which of the following statement are correct on the basis of information in the above passage? तो क्या पूछा जा रहा है कि हमारे पास यहाँ पे 4 statements है, हमें पूछा जा रहा है कि कौन सा statement passage के अनुसार कौन सा statement सही है और वही हमें पता लगाना है. So let's look at the first sentence. The first sentence is Buddhist economists totally prohibit the use of non-renewable sources. अब ये तो बात गलत है क्योंकि उन्होंने completely prohibit नहीं किया है. वो लोग ये बता रहे कि पहले we'll have to understand that it's significant, it's very important to understand that how much of a significance does non-renewable energy resources hold in our lives, and we'll have to acknowledge the fact that once we run out of, we exhaust the availability of non-renewable resources, whatever we are left with, so we won't be able to make non-renewable energy sources very soon, right? And that might just cause very significant impact on our society the way it is. It might just change the world that it appears to us. So standing there, उन्होंने completely prohibit नहीं किया है. They have just told us to keep a check on the amount of non-renewable energy sources that we are using on a daily basis, and also more, we'll have to use non-renewable sources of energy only when it is truly unavoidable, right? So ये statement तो गलत है. Let's look at the second statement. The attitude of modern economists towards natural resources is uneconomic. Well, this is also again not true, because the whole point of modern economics, since they were not differentiating between non-renewable and renewable sources of energy, the whole point of them was to focus on something that will actually help to curtail the cost and will actually result in cost efficiency, which means that it will make everything, the resources being used in something, a bit cheaper. So something which is made available in the market or to anyone in general at a very cheap price, that is very economic, right? But यहाँ पे लिखा है कि uneconomic decision है. Uneconomic मतलब जो cheap नहीं है, जो सस्ता नहीं है. पर हमने passage पढ़ा है, हमको पता है that economics, जो modern economics चाह रहे थे कि हमारा cost थोड़ा कम हो, तो which is economic. Thus this second statement is also incorrect. Lastly, speaking about the third sentence, complete non-violence is not possible. So this is actually what there was written in the paragraph also, कि हम बिल्कुल भी non-renewable sources use ना करें, ये तो संभव नहीं है. But at the same time, अगर use करते वक्त, we can keep a check, we can be a bit, we can restrain ourselves from overusing the available resources, especially the non-renewable sources of resources. Then it will be actually beneficial for us in the long run as a society. So this statement is actually a right statement, and thus among the four options that we have, it's gonna be number C, which denotes that only number C is correct, right? Let us take the next question. So as you can see, the next question is there on the screen. The Buddhist viewpoint implies. So implies का मतलब है, implies का मतलब है कि सुलझाव, समझाता है, right? तो इम्प्लाई करना मतलब किसी को कुछ सुझाव देना या कुछ समझाना. सो बुद्धिस्ट का जो व्यू पॉइंट है, व्यू पॉइंट मतलब जो पर्सपेक्टिव है, सो व्यू पॉइंट का अर्थ है पर्सपेक्टिव. बुद्धिस्ट का जो पर्सपेक्टिव है वो हमें ये समझाता है. सो देयर आर फोर ऑप्शन. कंजर्वेशन शुड बी गिवन द हाईएस्ट कंसिडरेशन. Idle projects are highly capital intensive. तो ये तो था ही नहीं पैसेज में, ये तो गलत है. Oil is to be preferred since it does not produce ash. ये भी नहीं था पैसेज में. So again we are crossing it out. Money economics should govern the choice of energy sources. ये भी नहीं था, क्योंकि ऐसे उनका मनी इकोनॉमिक्स से कुछ ऐसे कुछ मनी इकोनॉमिक्स के ऊपर कुछ बताना नहीं था उन लोगों का. They wanted to let us know that it is our duty to have a check on the amount of non-renewable resources that has been consumed by the society on a daily basis, and they also have requested us to use non-renewable sources only when it is unavoidable, right? So thus we are going to go with the first sentence, which is conservation should be given the highest consideration. So conserving nature, conserving the non-renewable sources of energy is actually very important for us as a society, because we have to understand that with the depletion as it's happening of non-renewable society, non-renewable sources of energy with every day, it's very difficult, it will be very difficult for us to actually strive and sail through when we have completely exhausted the number or the resources which were available. Speaking about non-renewable sources of energy. So standing there, the first sentence is actually the right statement, and thus we move to our next statement. So as you might see on the screen, Buddhist economists are not in favor of. Favor something that is given approval. So favor मतलब जो चीज हमें मतलब हम किसी को फेवर कर रहे हैं. सो आई कैन से दैट अमंग ऑल द फूड आइटम्स आई प्रेफर समथिंग, आई फेवर समथिंग. तो फेवर मतलब वो पसंद है. सो बुद्धिस्ट इकोनॉमिस्ट्स आर नॉट इन फेवर ऑफ, उनको पसंद नहीं हो रहा है क्या. सो द ऑप्शंस आर economic development. So economic development is something that is really needed for us to sustain and survive, right, among all the countries that we have in the world. So definitely this is wrong, because economic development is something that we should welcome, and that is not something that we have our discretion against. So world economy being governed by oil prices, तो ये तो था ही नहीं passage में. So definitely this again will be crossed out. This is not valid. Third option is using non-renewable sources indiscriminately. तो indiscriminately मतलब without a check, without check. And lastly, we have harnessing wind energy. तो wind energy की कोई बात तो थी नहीं passage में, so we are crossing it out. Speaking about statement number C, using non-renewable sources indiscriminately. So what does this statement tell us? What does this statement mean? That using the non-renewable sources of energy without having a check on the amount that we are using of it, right? So this is exactly what the Buddhists had themselves against of. They actually wanted to propagate the fact that we must be using non-renewable sources of energy, but we have to keep a check on the amount that we are using on a daily basis. So it's gonna be the third statement, because this is actually what the Buddhist had themselves against of, which was using non-renewable sources of energy indiscriminately without check. Speaking about the next question as we have on the screen, in this passage the author has tried to, so the author in this passage has tried to propagate an ideology. We need to identify which is the exact ideology that the author has tried to propagate. So statement number 1 is, show that the modern economist is concerned only with costs. Number B is, underline the need of conserving natural resources. Number C is, differentiate between two economic philosophies. And number D is, explain the impact of oil on world economy. So the paragraph, throughout the paragraph, we had nothing to tell us about the impact of, impact means, by the way, effect. So in the paragraph, we had nothing that was telling us, that told us, that informed us about the kind of effect oil is having on world economy. So this statement is invalid. Next is, differentiate between the two economic philosophies. Well, no, this is not true, because we do not have two economic philosophies in the passage. Number B is, underline the need of conserving natural resources. So yes, this is actually true, because the whole passage is about understanding that it's very important for us to conserve our natural resources, right, as they exist, because if we run out of our natural resources, we cannot remake them, right? Exactly why the name comes, non-renewable sources of energy, and thus we need to keep a check on the usage so that we never run out of them. Now, as I think I have shared in my last class also, last video also, that you have basically 10 questions coming in SPI GAT exam from comprehension, out of which you will have 2 questions on antonym and synonym. So what is synonym? Synonym are basically 2 different words with the same meaning, right? So synonyms basically refer to 2 different words which usually have the same meaning. So the word of the synonym of which we'll have to understand is indispensable. So while teaching you, while I was reading the paragraph also, I think I have gone through, I have tangentially touched the meaning of the word indispensable. So indispensable basically means something that we cannot avoid, something that we cannot escape, something that we cannot prevent, right? So synonym means basically the word that means the same. So from here we'll basically have to come up with the meaning of the word indispensable. So see, the first word is preventable, but just as I said, indispensable is basically something which cannot be prevented, so preventable is the wrong option. Needless. So indispensable again means something which is an absolute necessity, and thus needless again has to be crossed out from the list of option. Then comes the word unavoidable. Yes, this is the correct option, because indispensable means something that cannot be escaped, that cannot be avoided. Thus, the word unavoidable is basically the correct synonym for the word indispensable. Speaking about antonym, antonym is basically the opposite word for something. So antonym of extravagantly. So before that, we need to understand what exactly does the word extravagantly mean, right? So extravagantly is basically in general means the lack of restraint, right? Something which is done in an uncontrolled manner, unchecked manner. So that is basically what extravagantly means. So you see, The first word is unrestrained. Unrestrained is exactly what extravagantly mean, right? So this is a synonym, not an antonym. The second is uneconomical. Well, uneconomical again is something which is spending a lot of money without having checks. So that basically almost means what extravagantly mean. Thirdly, speaking about improvident, improvident is again something doing something very haphazardly without having a proper like protocol on it. So improvident again means something what extravagantly mean. Lastly is reasonable. Reasonable is doing something in a very tamed, in a very polished, in a very planned manner. In reasonable, doing something with logic. So reasonable is actually the antonym for extravagant. Antonym, as I said, implies that opposite of a word. So antonym, which is opposite of extravagant, is basically reasonable, because extravagantly is basically lacking check, restraint, control, whereas the word reasonable basically means something which is done in a very planned and organized manner. So in today's class, this was all about it. We came to know about what exactly comprehension is, and I showed you that it's very important for us to read and understand each and every paragraph, and also more, knowing certain words, vocabulary is very important when it especially comes down to the cases of antonyms and synonyms. So in that case, I think I can suggest you that you solve the papers as you have available with you of the previous year. And if you have any query, if there is any specific paper that you would want me to make an analysis on, so you leave that in the comment section and I'll get back to you with a new video as soon as possible. So the tricks, actually, how you can reach out to us is you can reach out to us on our Instagram profile, which is Adhyan Defense Academy. And if you basically want to stay updated with all the videos that we post on a daily basis, you'll quickly have to join our Telegram channel, which is again by the name of Adhyan Defense Academy. So that was all from my side for today. I wish to see you again in our next video. Thank you.